Now, the Battle of Vechtkorp is absolutely remarkable because the trekkers in the Transvaal had been absolutely devastated by the Matabele, and they'd had so many of the cattle stolen, and they knew they were coming to a fight, so they went to a hill, what they call Vechtkorp, and they anchored their wagons in a laager. This is the first of the laager battles, Battle of Vechtkorp. This is now in 1837, and they anchored them around, and they actually nailed chains around so that the wagons couldn't be tipped over. They brought the toughest thorn bushes on the outside to make it really a bit as impregnable as they could. There were only 30 people to fight there, and that included 10 men, and the rest were women and children, and it included right down to the 10-year-olds, like Paul Kruger was a 10-year-old at the Battle of Vechtkorp, and he was fighting there as he was one of the 30 fighters. And this picture, as you see here, the women fully involved in the battle, and old men, young children, just 30 of them facing thousands of Matabele, and the Matabele had never been beaten. And this was their first experience, and they were absolutely beyond rage when everything they tried just didn't work. They couldn't get inside this laager, they couldn't break through, and this little Vechtkorp broke the power of the Matabele, so that afterwards Potgieter chased out the Matabele out of the Transvaal, and they fled to what became Rhodesia, and well, that was the Shauna's problem, but it at least freed up the Transvaal. Now, the story in Rhodesia is another day, but there the Matabele totally enslaved the Shauna, and when the whites came there in 1890, they were on a collision course with the Matabele. At first they negotiated, and with Cecil John Rhodes's normal conniving and wheeling and dealing, he sold him a gunboat for the Zambezi River and a whole lot of rifles and beads and other nonsense, and at the end he has given us huge swathe of territory, Mashonaland, as his area to call Rhodesia and to settle the British South Africa Company. But it didn't take long. This is the raising of the flag in 1890 at what became Salisbury. And the settlers were trying to get going when suddenly they found themselves under attack by the Matabele, who were angry over the fact that they were actually taking the sides of their Shauna slaves and trying to stop them from just coming in and enslaving and raiding and killing the Shauna at will. And so you had the battle, including the Shangani patrol of Alan Wilson, where ultimately the Matabele all came in and they surrendered, and they said, these men fought like lions. If such young boys can fight like this, what will happen when their fathers come for revenge? We want to surrender. And it's from that point that converts came to Christ in Matabele land. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to 22nd September 1828. Shaka, the founder and the king of the Zulus, was stabbed to death by his half-brothers, Princes Dingon and Malangana. In fact, the word is he is stabbed in the back. While he is sleeping. It wasn't even as nice as they just depicted there. He is stabbed in the back while sleeping by Dingon. So Dingon is really treacherous. Missionaries and English traders who visited Zululand described Dingon as astute, sly, cruel, temperamental, brutal, charming, diplomatic, and treacherous. Shortly after murdering his half-brother Dingon, he quickly arranged assassination of his co-conspirator and brother, Malangana, and then he systematically executed every aristocratic rival, anyone else who could possibly be a danger to him, including the commander-in-chief of Shaka's army, Ndalaka, who he had strangled. Dingon was about 30 years old when he seized power, and he began to build himself a new capital at Ungungungluvu, meaning the place of the great elephant. He quickly accumulated over 300 wives and concubines, and traders and missionaries described his appetite as voracious, both sexually and otherwise. He soon became extremely obese. This guy just lived for pleasure. He was not like his brother Shaka. He didn't like to go out in military campaigns. He stayed at the palace. He was not a warrior like Shaka, so he never led military campaigns. He sent out his impis. He remained at Ungungungluvu, surrounded by a continual program of feasting and dancing, wine, woman and song and all that sort of thing. Or should I say beer, woman and song. I don't think they knew about wine. Well, enter Piet Retief. When the Trek leader Piet Retief came to Dingon to negotiate the right for the voortrekkers to settle in the depopulated territory between the Tugela and the Bushman's River, what is present-day Natal, he was warned by the missionaries that one of the principal objectives of Shaka had been to totally depopulate all surrounding territories as far as the soldiers could penetrate, so that his followers, over whom he held such despotic sway, might have no asylum, no refuge to escape if they attempted to escape his murderous rule. But Retief wasn't concerned about those warnings. He was also warned about the defeat of the renegade Zulu General Mzilikazi at the hands of the Boers in Transvaal had sent shockwaves throughout Zululand. Here's the Zulu army, because the Matabele were Zulus after all. They're renegade Zulus, but still they're Zulus. A Zulu army defeated? Unheard of. by a handful of whites. Very disturbing. So as Dingaan's military expeditions that he had sent against Mzilikazi had all been indecisive, he began to fear the power of the Boers. How could these people in smaller numbers defeat Mzilikazi that my MPs could not? But Piet Retief seemed supremely self-confident. He brushed aside every warning about the danger of this dictator with whom he is attempting to negotiate. Here's a stone carving at the Voortrekker monument of Piet Retief being sworn in on the Bible as the leader of the trekkers. So here's Umgungundlovu. Dingaan's capital, Umgungundlovu, the place of the great elephant, is described as an efficient military camp entirely fenced in with thorn bushes. The king's quarters dominated the high ground, and it overlooked the 2,000 huts to each side. There's 1,000 huts on each side of the great open arena, and each hut accommodated 20 warriors. So this is really military barracks. And within the lines of the military huts were 4 strongly fenced in cattle kraals. These pictures are not totally to scale, they're not totally accurate, and obviously it's not as detailed, but there's different ones. They've done some reconstruction of the main huts on the site of Umgungundlovu, which they did for the Shaka Zulu film, and we visited them there. Dingaan's own quarters consisted of hundreds of beehive huts, including huts for his enormous harem and his council hut and his reception hall, and both of them 20 feet in height. And the roof was supported by 22 pillars entirely covered in beadwork. Lots of work involved. The floors were made of mud and dung, polished with blood and fat until they shone like a mirror, it said. Umgungundlovu as a whole was arranged in ovals, circles, semicircles, with thousands of beehive huts appearing like beads in a necklace. I mean, that's the whole design. Facing the capital on the other side of the stream below was the Hill of Execution, Kwa Matawane. So exactly from where the king sat from his hut, he could literally watch the executions on the other side. Not that he'd go out of his kraal often. This is one of the contemporary pictures of Dingaan at that time. Dingaan required his subjects to throw themselves to the ground, crawl forward in the dust for about 200 meters before coming to a halt a good distance from his throne. Piet Retief and the other white visitors refused to succumb to such indignities, and they stood in the presence of the king. Now their description was that Dingaan was entirely hairless. He shaved every day. He's described as having an absolute abhorrence of human hair. He wore many ornaments on his head, and his body was rubbed daily with fat to make him appear like polished ebony. Now there were missionaries just opposite, also near the Hill of Execution, who were working there. And acting as the King's secretary was Reverend Francis Owen of the Church Missionary Society, Church of England pastor, missionary. And most of what we know concerning the meetings of Piet Retief with Dingaan we get from Owen's diary, because he was there as the translator, who'd be communicating between Zulu and Afrikaans or English. Piet Retief first reached Umgungundlovu on the 5th of November 1837. The king entertained him with war dances by thousands of his warriors, and Owen warned Retief of the countless cruelties, the tortures, the executions that he had been forced to witness. However, Piet Retief seemed most impressed with the sincerity of Dingaan, his graciousness, his intelligence, and his goodwill. So it didn't matter what the missionary told him, Piet Retief knew better. After seeking to impress Retief for 2 days with parades of his regiments and his herds, and each regiment had the same colour shield. You know, you'd have the black shield regiment, the brown shield regiment, the brown and white regiment, the white shield regiment, the white and black regiment. So they would, from the cattle, and then they would keep cattle that would be exactly those same colours as the colours of the shield, so that you could tell each regiment apart. So Dingaan informed Retief that he was willing to grant the trekkers the territory his armies had depopulated across the Tugela River and around Port Natal, on condition that Piet Retief should return the cattle